Good morning, and thank you for joining our webinar on ERA's Energy Savings for Business program. We're glad that you could join us so we could share this great opportunity with you. We believe this program can help your company save on the bottom line, increase the value of your buildings, create jobs in Alberta, and make a real difference in greenhouse gas emissions reductions in Alberta. Hopefully today's discussion can help you prepare to take full advantage of the program when it launches. My name is Marc Huot, and I'm the Program Director of the Energy Savings for Business Program for Emissions Reductions Alberta, or ERA.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Steve MacDonald, the CEO for ERA.
Steve and I will be trading off back and forth today as we talk about our recently announced Energy Savings for Business program, and we'll both be here after the presentation to answer any questions during the Q&A period. Before we get into the agenda, I'd like to go through a few housekeeping items just to make sure we get the most out of today. First of all, we're expecting over 300 participants today, so everyone's microphone is muted to avoid unintentional background noise. If you encounter technical challenges related to the webinar connection, please email Amanda at info@eralberta.ca and we will try to help you if we can. However, if you can't resolve your technical issues or you need to leave early, we will be posting this recording on the webinar on the Energy Savings for Business website so you can visit it later. The recording will both include the presentation and the live Q&A. In terms of an agenda for today's webinar, we plan to cover a few items that will hopefully help everyone be ready to be online. First, Steve will talk briefly about ERA and our mandate. Next, we'll provide an overview of the Energy Savings for Business program. We'll cover some key points about the program, including eligibility, project measures and types, the application process, and program timelines. We will also provide advice for anyone that's interested in making a submission. Finally, we'll end off by answering some of your questions. So if you do have questions, please type them into the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel that should be on the right. We will answer as many as we can, but if we don't have time to address your question, you're welcome to follow up with us afterward. With that, it is my pleasure to turn things over to our CEO, Steve MacDonald, who will get things started with an overview of ERA.
Thank you, Mark. Earlier this month, Premier Kenney and Minister Jason Nixon announced a commitment of up to $280 million for 3 ERA programs. This funding includes up to $180 million from the province and $100 million from the federal government. And this funding will be leveraged even further by additional public and private investment. This means the total value of the project supported will be approximately $900 million. In addition, it's our expectation that these programs will result in nearly 5,000 jobs and cut an estimated 13 million tons of emissions. In today's webinar, as Mark said, we will focus on our $55 million Energy Savings for Business, our ESB program. This program reinforces the value the provincial government places on energy efficiency as a lever to reduce emissions and provide support to small and medium-sized businesses. The $280 million in funding also includes up to $150 million for a shovel-ready challenge, which is focused on large-scale industrial projects. And it includes a $75 million boost to our existing partnership intake program. This commitment of both provincial and federal funding will help unlock the development and deployment of the technologies we need to stimulate the economy now and create the lower emissions industries of the future. I know there's been a lot of funding announcements lately, and we know many companies have limited resources to respond to these new programs. But we are designing a process that is respectful of the challenges you are facing. We will reduce the administrative burden of the application process and ensure more funding goes directly to participants. It is clear that energy efficiency initiatives have the potential to significantly reduce GHGs. Research has shown that they can help meet over 30% of Canada's future emission reduction targets. While current economic conditions are expected to impact market demand, we believe ERA's new program can help to increase the market adoption of new technology, getting us closer to the emissions reductions and cost savings we know are possible for small and medium-sized businesses. The lessons learned from a variety of previous program approaches have been combined to deliver an improved, lower-cost program while capturing the benefits of market demand and experience with past program application processes. Some of you listening today may not know a lot about ERA. I can tell you ERA has a proven track record of fulfilling the vision, mandate, and strategic priorities that you see on this slide. When the Premier announced our funding on November 2nd, he made it clear that businesses must demonstrate they are serious about improving their environmental performance and lowering emissions if they want to continue to access capital. ERA's investments ensure Alberta has competitive businesses that deliver sustainable environmental outcomes, attract investment, create jobs, and grow our GDP. Our vision is anchored in the belief that our success is measured in both economic and environmental terms. And our portfolio reflects this. It aligns with both Alberta's economic and environmental priorities. And our investments are guided by our technology roadmap. The pathways it defines and the areas of focus are the priorities for Alberta's ERA's funding portfolio. And the projects we have funded span all time scales and sectors, from agriculture to oil sands, and from energy efficiency technologies to game-changing innovations. Since 2009, we have committed $611 million to support 185 projects valued at $4.4 billion. The large project value reflects our ability to leverage more than 6-to-1 funding from project partners. These investments will also lead to the creation of the equivalent of almost 22,000 person-year jobs by 2024 and contribute over $3 billion to Alberta's GDP. And most importantly, we are on track to deliver cumulative GHG reductions of almost 35 million tons by 2030. It's clear significant investment and effort is required to identify and scale up the innovation that will ensure Alberta succeeds in a lower emissions world. At ERA, our role has been to help de-risk the most promising technologies, the ones that are closest to commercial deployment. And now, in the case of the ESB program, we are working to accelerate the adoption of targeted, commercially available energy efficiency technologies. Now, it's absolutely clear the current COVID-19 pandemic and oil price challenges have created incredible financial stress for Alberta businesses. This includes trades and suppliers that provide services to a wide range of sectors within Alberta's economy. 2020 has taught us things can change quickly, and that now, more than ever, businesses need support to navigate the current economic and health conditions. ERA's previous efforts have really focused on technology readiness. The addition of the ESB program is about accelerating market readiness. This market deployment initiative helps complete the continuum of ERA's investment portfolio. Energy Savings for Business is the right program at the right time. It meets a known market need and focuses on supporting a critical component of the economy, small and medium-sized businesses. With that, I'm going to hand the presentation back to Marc, who'll get into the details of our newest program.
Thank you, Steve. Before I begin, it's important to note that the Energy Savings for Business, or ESB as we'll call it for short, is still in the design phase. Today, I'll be going through some of the core program information, but please note that some of the finer details are still being finalized. All of the final information will be made available at or before the program launches at the end of January. Diving straight into the details of the program overview, we are excited to have received over $55 million in funding from the provincial and federal governments to support cost-saving and emissions-reducing projects in Alberta. This will make ESB one of the single biggest energy efficiency program budgets for small and medium businesses we've had in the province to date. This funding is sourced from a combination of the carbon price paid by large emitters in Alberta through the Technology Innovation and Emissions Reductions, or TIER Fund in Alberta, and the Federal Low Carbon Economy Leadership Fund. As the name Energy Savings for Business suggests, this program will be aimed at small and medium-scale industrial and commercial facilities in the province. We're hoping to get these funds driving new projects as soon as possible when the program opens to applications. As a part of Alberta's economic recovery plan, we designed the Energy Savings for Business program with 4 core purposes in mind. By offering incentives for business to take on energy efficiency projects, ESB will result in job creation and the preservation of jobs in the energy efficiency product and service provider sector. The energy savings benefits of the projects will drive operational efficiencies and reduce energy costs, making participating businesses more competitive. This in turn will help boost our economy and support our province's economic recovery. Finally, we're going to do all this while supporting technologies and projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Alberta and address Alberta's longer-term sustainability goals. Looking at the numbers, Alberta has over 160,000 small and medium-sized enterprises, and we're hoping to reach thousands with this program. As the ESB program rolls out, we're anticipating achieving the following results. Over 1,400 local jobs will be supported as projects rely on local contractors and a skilled workforce. This means direct jobs such as electricians, HVAC technicians, plumbing and heating experts, equipment distributors, lighting installers, product suppliers, engineers, and the list goes on. Provincial investment will be leveraged more than 5 times with other public and private investments, creating $300 million in GDP impacts and other economic activity. Over their lifetime, projects supported through the program are expected to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 1.1 million tons of CO2 equivalent and will generate over $183 million in energy savings. With that, I'm now going to dive into some of the program details. The Energy Savings for Business program will provide financial incentives to participants who install energy efficiency upgrades and on-site generation projects in their facilities. As we designed the program, we considered the needs of small and medium businesses and built our program on past experience to make ESB as effective as possible. For those of you who have participated in Energy Efficiency Alberta programs in the past, much of the program mechanics will be familiar and straightforward. First, the program will offer up to $250,000 per project and to a maximum of $500,000 per company, ensuring funds are available to a wide range of companies across the province. We're going to be keeping the program open to applications continually until the program budget is fully allocated, and we'll be processing applications on a first-come, first-served basis. The application process will include an upfront pre-approval to screen projects for eligibility and other criteria prior to project installation. Once pre-approved, funds for the project incentives are reserved and held until the project is complete. This gives businesses the reassurance, confidence, and time needed to proceed with equipment purchase and installation. To keep things simple and easy for small businesses, we've chosen a prescriptive program approach. This means we will have preset incentive levels for a specific list of eligible measures or technologies. This predictability allows you to plan ahead, know what's eligible, what incentive levels to expect, and significantly reduces the paperwork. Incentive levels are being designed to achieve the best results for each technology type and will vary measure to measure. However, in most cases, incentives will be approximately 15 to 30% of the average costs. To make the program as accessible as possible to different businesses and facility types, we've built on past programs to offer incentives for a wide range of common technologies and upgrades. We're selecting measures that best reduce a facility's energy use below business as usual levels, offer strong energy savings to the participants, drive cost-effective greenhouse gas emissions reductions, and are proven, well understood, and suitable to our streamlined prescriptive process. The final measure list will be available at program launch, but to give you a sense of what to expect, we are considering a range of measures in the following categories: high-efficiency boilers, heaters, and furnaces, a variety of HVAC project types, motor upgrades and variable frequency drives, compressed air system improvements and leak repairs, building envelope retrofits, lighting systems and lighting controls, process heat efficiency upgrades, power management and building automation systems, a range of sector-specific measures for restaurants, hospitality, and refrigeration facilities, and alternate on-site sources of power such as solar PV and combined heat and power. Being more complex projects, solar PV and CHP will have to meet additional requirements. For example, solar projects must be compliant with Alberta's microgeneration regulation. Both CHP and solar will have to meet minimum performance parameters, and system sizes will likely be limited to 1.5 megawatts of capacity for both CHP and solar. Now I would like to talk about who can participate in the Energy Savings for Business program. As I mentioned earlier, the program is being designed for small and medium-sized companies, commercial and industrial facilities in the province. So the program is going to be most suited to those types of participants. However, eligibility to participate will be much broader. ESB will be open to all businesses and nonprofit organizations across Alberta, except for the following: facilities participating in the tier regulation. This includes large emitters and facilities that have opted into tier in the given year. New construction projects will not be eligible, with the exception of on-site power generation installations. Federally, provincially, and municipally owned buildings are not eligible. Other publicly funded institutional buildings, and private residential spaces within commercial buildings. The full eligibility criteria will be defined in the program's terms and conditions at program launch. Contractors, including product and service providers, are the backbone of any successful energy efficiency program. Participants will rely on the skilled local workforce to plan and design systems, select appropriate technologies, and install high-end and high-quality projects. In many cases, contractors will often even manage applications for participants as well. To help ensure the program's success, we do require that all participants use eligible contractors as their primary contractor for this project. However, we are designing our contractor onboarding process to be as easy and streamlined as possible. To become an eligible contractor, product and service providers will need to register and agree to a code of conduct and the program's terms and conditions before participating. Upon registration, we will provide basic training on the program rules, the application process, and any online portals or software used in the program. For contractors listening today, we encourage you to stay tuned as we are aiming to begin accepting eligible contractors and onboarding them prior to the program launch so that folks are ready to proceed with projects when ESB opens. Next, I wanted to talk about how participants can apply for ESB incentives when the program launches. Recognizing that time is money for businesses, we put a lot of thought into making the application process as streamlined as possible. All applications will be managed through an easy-to-use online tool, and the web forms will be simple and straightforward to navigate. The application process itself will be broken down into two core stages. The first stage is the project pre-approval. Early in the project life, applicants will submit a project for pre-approval, at which time eligibility and scope will be reviewed. Pre-approved projects will then have funds reserved and will be allotted a set period of time to complete the installation, for example, 6 months. It is important to note, once the program launches, all projects must receive pre-approval prior to incurring any eligible expenses. The second stage is the completion approval. Once a project is installed and operational, participants will submit all required documentation for final review. Virtual or in-person site visits will be conducted for randomized sample projects at that time. Projects that are approved as complete will then receive an incentive payment. To make it more clear, this visual shows the typical flow of participant through the program, although individual processes may vary. There may be some preliminary work not shown on this figure, but once a participant has a project in mind, the first step is typically to select a primary contractor. If the contractor is new to the program, the contractor will then register. However, if they're already an eligible contractor, this step can be skipped. From there, the project is planned, including any system design and equipment selection. When the necessary details are finalized, the project can be submitted for pre-approval. The application will be reviewed, and if it meets the program requirements, a formal pre-approval will be issued along with a funding reservation. At that time, the participant will be required to accept the program terms and conditions and can proceed to purchase and install associated equipment as per the submission. Once the project is complete and fully operational, including any permitting required outside of the program, all required completion documents will be submitted for a completion review. The program team will then conduct a completion review, including virtual or on-site inspections for randomized sample of projects, and if everything checks out as completed as approved, the project will receive a completion approval and incentives will be issued through electronic fund transfers. And with that, the project is complete. This next slide covers the timelines for some of the key program milestones. As you likely already know, the program was announced formally on November 2nd, and from then until program launch, we will be accepting expressions of interest on our page. We know there's a lot of demand for this program, and we hope that the announcement motivated folks to start thinking about potential projects. We will have the program open to accept applications by February 1st, 2021, and we are working very hard behind the scenes to get the program launched even sooner if possible. We'll provide updates on any timeline changes as we approach launch. As I mentioned earlier, we're also hoping to get started with contractor registration before the program launches. Following the official program launch, we'll also be hosting additional webinars to walk through the application process in more detail including how to use the online portal and to cover additional details for eligible contractor onboarding and contractor resources. As I mentioned earlier, the program will remain open continuously for new project applications until the budget is fully allocated. How quickly this will happen, however, really does depend on the volume, complexity, and size of applications we get, but we expect it to be open between 6 and 12 months following the program launch. However, as this program reserves funding for projects and incentives on a first-come, first-served basis, we really do recommend you get your application in as soon as possible. As we prepare to launch, we highly encourage interested businesses and contractors to submit an expression of interest. By doing so, you'll be placed on the program mailing list, and this is the best way to receive updates and announcements related to the program. The form is quick and easy to fill out, and you can find it at the bottom of our ESB page. Just to be clear, submitting an expression of interest does not have any effect on your future applications, nor does it reserve funds in any way. Finally, as I mentioned, the program is still being finalized and we will have more information in the coming months. All participating projects will be subject to the program terms and conditions at the time of the application submission. So please be aware that what we covered today may be subject to change until the final details are published, but I thank you for your patience as we finalize the details. With the formal part of the webinar now complete, I wanted to start the question period by addressing some of the common questions we've been receiving since the program launched. How familiar will this be to the previous energy efficiency programs? So for those of you who have participated in previous similar programs, for example, the Residential Commercial Savings Program or a Business Energy Savings Program over the past few years, you will likely find the application requirements and process for ESB to be quite similar. We're doing this deliberately to continue the momentum of contractors' experience with those programs. Further, we are fine-tuning the new program, building on what we learned and making it more effective for everyone involved. If I started a project already, will I still be eligible for funding through this program? Recognizing that the program was announced on November 2nd, and many of you will have projects that you want to get started on right away. As such, when the program launches, we will accept projects that started between November 2nd, 2020 and the program launch date. To be eligible, however, these projects must submit applications for pre-approval within 30 days of program launch. They must meet all eligible criteria as published at the program launch, and all eligible expenses must be incurred after November 2nd. What support will there be for contractors? In addition to forthcoming webinars at launch, we'll also have an educational resource page and handy tools such as instructional videos available on a range of topics, including how to submit applications, the rules of the program, and a marketing toolkit specifically for contractors. Will the program budget be divided into categories by measure or technology type? We've been asked, for example, if there will be specific program budgets allocations for things like solar PV or CHP. The answer at this time is no. We are designing the program such that all projects have equal access to the program funding on a first-come, first-served basis. However, we do want to ensure that we have a diversity of measures. So if we're seeing that one category of measures taking over the program, we may implement further limits as needed. Any such changes would be well communicated at the time. If I have already applied for ERA funding, am I still eligible? As the scope of ESB differs significantly from the other ERA calls, we are allowing previous applicants to ERA programs and calls to apply for energy savings for business, but only for new projects that have not been previously approved for funding. All right, if you've made it this far and you're still awake, this is now your opportunity to ask questions you have for Steve and I. If you haven't already, please type your questions into the questions section of the control panel. At this time, I would like to also introduce my colleague, Allison Mostowich, who will moderate the question period. Allison, our Manager of Engagement and Outreach, and Luca Youngin, our Program Manager, have been behind the magic curtain of this webinar, collecting all your questions. Allison, what do we have for questions?
Thanks, Mark. Hi, everybody. Thank you to everybody who has submitted questions so far. We've already got a lot of great questions in the inbox. We likely won't have time to get to all of them today, unfortunately. If we don't get to your question, please submit it to energysavings@eralberta.ca, and we'll be happy to respond to your question one-on-one. Please also note that we'll be using your questions to inform our frequently asked questions document, which will be released closer to launch. So I can see we've got quite a few questions coming in, but I'll start with some of the ones that we've already collected. The first one is, what do you consider a small or medium-sized business? How will this be quantified in the application?
Yep, so as we said, we're designing it for small and medium businesses. That really dictated the size limits of our incentives and some of the budgets and the technology types are going. We haven't specifically defined it because we know there are a huge diversity of businesses out there. And again, as I mentioned, it's not limited to small and medium businesses, it's just designed for that group. So really, it's a much broader eligibility. All business types, except for those we listed as not eligible, are able to participate in the program. And sorry, that would include nonprofits and charitable organizations as well.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So the next question is, I think this might actually be a good one for Steve to weigh on as well. Will the COVID-19 pandemic prevent the government from being able to provide the funding as described? Is the money guaranteed?
That's a great question. I'm always reluctant to predict the future. What I can tell you is the money from the province and the federal government is based on funds already received. For the provincial government, it's funds received from large final emitters through the TIER program. So that money will be in ERA's bank account shortly. The federal government money is also assured as long as we can meet the conditions of the funding. And so I would essentially say that COVID will not impact this funding.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Our next question is, can businesses do their own installations, or is this only for third-party contractors?
Only for third-party contractors, so all projects must be installed with a primary contractor who is an eligible contractor as defined in the program.
Okay, thanks, Mark. And we had a similar question about contractors running the whole application process for the customer. Does the customer have the opportunity to submit the application, or could the contractor run the whole application process?
Yeah, that's a great question. Both will be available. We recognize everyone has different approaches, so it will be an option for both the participant themselves or the contractor to submit the applications.
Thanks, Mark. So we have another similar question about contractors. So there's just a question about clarification. So the question is, do you have to select a contractor first? How do you get multiple quotes for jobs if you have to do that?
So to answer the first part, yes, you do need to select a contractor before applying because that will be one of the questions on the pre-approval application form. What we recommend really is that you get your quotes and do your project design before applying. Although you can work with your contractor, they should ideally be familiar with the program, but yeah, that work would typically occur before. And then once the project is defined, because you'll also need to know your measured types, product numbers, and that type of thing. So you will have to have a contractor prior to applying.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So an additional question we had was, will farms be qualified as small to medium businesses?
Yeah, so we are still finalizing the details, but by and large, any farm that is considered a business will be able to apply.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we have some questions about the solar PV systems. There was a question about elaborating on the additional criteria required for the solar PV system. So would you be able to provide a little bit more detail on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, those finer points will be published at launch, but what we're talking about is very similar to what you would have experienced in previous programs in Alberta. So one example is we will continue to have a performance requirement that solar PV systems do achieve a minimum amount of output relative to the expected output of the given location. So that would doesn't dictate things like tilt and orientation, but it would have to be pretty close to optimal to be eligible through the program. So that's one example.
Great. Okay, so we have some questions about timelines, and I want to get to those. So how long do companies have to install the project?
At this time, that's going to depend probably on the project type. We're still finalizing the details. Typically, we're looking at shorter periods for some of the simpler projects, something in the range of 6 months. We're looking at longer timelines for for larger projects, particularly solar PV and CHP. That information will be finalized at launch, and part of it is that we're trying to collect more information to understand the full impacts COVID is having on project timelines, and so we want to get the timeline right. Obviously, being economic stimulus, we are trying to drive projects to go as quickly as possible, but we do want to be flexible and understanding of the fact that some timelines are a little bit slower these days.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, we have a question about amalgamating funds with existing programs. So can the program be amalgamated with additional funding programs?
That is a great question. We get that one a lot. So first and foremost, any project receiving funding through SB cannot be funded by any other program that received its funding from the tier funds. That's a clear no. However, we are still evaluating stacking opportunities with other programs. In most cases, it doesn't present an issue if the funds come from other locations. That being said, there might be some specific limitations either through ESB or the other programs themselves. So we encourage you as you approach applying to both to make sure. Further, if you are stacking funds from multiple programs, both programs will likely require some additional information, including the ability to understand how much funding was received by the other program to ensure that we don't go over any determined limits.
Great, thanks, Mark. Is there a minimum incentive or project dollar amount?
There will be a minimum incentive. We're currently looking at around $2,000. Again, that detail might change prior to launch, but we are trying to keep it pretty flexible. Obviously, projects below that, the administration associated with it starts to outweigh the value, but we do want to keep it as open to as many folks as possible.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I might move into some questions that are around the eligibility, especially pertaining to measures. So let's start with on-site generation. Are on-site generation technologies other than solar PV and CHP eligible, such as solar thermal, concentrated solar power, biomass, wind, or microhydro?
Unfortunately, no, those aren't available at this time. And that's largely to do with the streamlined model we've selected. Those are often technologies that you just can't do on a prescriptive basis. They are really better suited to a custom program. So unfortunately, we're not able to work them in at this time.
Thanks for the clarification. Okay, and the next question, will there be funding and incentives to off-grid businesses wanting to install solar power?
So at this time, solar PV does have to be microgeneration regulation compliant. That would mean that they must be grid connected as part of the regulation. So no, off-grid solar PV will not be a part of this program. We are looking at off-grid solar as some applications for various oil and gas devices, and those are examples of things that might change between now and launch if we find that there are some common measures that make sense. But as far as actually offsetting on-site power with off-grid solar PV, unfortunately, no, that's not eligible at this time.
Okay. And we've got an interesting question about the technology that we've chosen to incent at this time. So this might be a good question for both you, Mark and Steve. So we have an individual wondering why the ERA would limit funding to the most popular technology. He's wondering about funding going to the markets so that it's allowed to decide how to best allocate the funding. So I think the question is about why we decided to incent specific technologies. So Steve or Mark, did you want to expand on that?
Sure, how about I start and Steve can jump in if he wants to add. So the first point of this that I want to clarify, we've selected what I call the prescriptive style program. And the reason we do that is it's fast, it's easy for participants, and most importantly, it keeps the administrative costs very low, which allows us to give the most amount of incentives out to participants while using the least amount possible in running the program. Because of that, though, it does limit us to technologies that are well understood because we are pre-calculating the energy savings of each measure that we will use, rather than making every participant complete a detailed energy assessment and an audit and doing modeling themselves. So because of that, we do have to limit it to specific technologies where we can apply that algorithm in order to avoid the additional costs associated with measuring. So that is part of the driver of how we selected our measures. As I mentioned, we also look at energy savings, greenhouse gas emissions reductions, and by going with measures that we know and are well understood, we can have more confidence that these are good measures for participants to take advantage of.
Yeah, Mark covered that really well. And what I just have to say to everybody is that we can only bite off so much in terms of outcomes and availability of funds, and so we do have to make choices. ERA will continue to be in the business of de-risking technologies that reduce GHGs and result in an economic benefit. So while this one program is in place, purpose-built for a very specific outcome, ERA will continue to be in the space through its shovel-ready programs, its partnership intake programs, and other opportunities in the agriculture space and the green the grid space that allow those other technologies to advance toward commercialization and ultimately into broad deployment.
Great, thank you, Steve and Mark. Okay, so I want to follow that question up with a question about labor. So there's a question stating, was the percent of funding based on the material cost or material and labor? So Mark, did you want to address that one?
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of sounds like a complicated, nerdy answer that I'll give, but so first and foremost, the measures will have a preset incentive level for technology type. So for example, it might be $1 per unit amount or $1 per watt or $1 per gigajoule, depending on whether it's a boiler, solar PV, et cetera. And we are setting those incentive levels at what we think is the best level to drive as much uptake while providing as much support as we can. And we did that looking at the cost of the measures. So we did consider the total installed cost. However, labor is obviously a huge variable. And so when I said we're between 15 and 30%, that was with what are kind of average costs for those measures. And then each measure will have like a hard cap of either 25% or 50%, depending on the measure, so that the incentive can't exceed that of the eligible costs. When we calculate that, we will be looking at labor and equipment product costs. So, I mean, in most cases, you'll get the incentive value as stated on the list when it's published. However, if you have, for example, products that are much lower cost than we anticipated, you might hit that 25%. However, again, we do include labor in there.
I just emphasize that this program is part of Alberta's economic stimulus program and creating jobs and opportunities. So that was very purposeful that labor costs are recognized and seen as valid. And we really do want this to result in jobs, to be quite frank.
Great, thank you both. Let's extend that question to studies and energy auditors. Will the cost of studies and energy auditors be covered in this program?
So in the exact same way, if there is a study completed or engineering assessment or design work completed directly related to that project, it will count as an eligible expense. Again, however, if you're already getting the maximum incentive, it won't necessarily impact, but yeah, if you have a low cost product, but you've put a lot of effort into designing it properly, that can be submitted as an eligible expense under the program.
Great, thank you, Mark. Okay, so we have a few questions again about contractors and how they work within the program. Does only the primary contractor need to be registered, or do all their potential subtrades also need to be individually registered as well?
So the primary contractor is the only one that has to be an eligible contractor. However, as they sign on the code of conduct and the terms and conditions, it does specify that they are taking responsibility for the whole project. And so therefore, any issues that occur through the program, if there are any, would go through that primary contractor as well. So it would, I guess I would highly advise any subcontractor to still be familiar with the program and the terms and conditions and be aware, but the responsibility will fall on the eligible contractor to manage all of those relationships.
Okay, and then there's a second question about if you can have two contractors working together on a single project, but I think you may have just answered that with your answer.
Yeah, so again, they'll just have to pick one that's the primary.
Great. Okay, and so when the funds are approved, who will the funds be distributed to, the contractor or to the client?
That's a great question. We haven't finalized that process, but what we typically do is the funds will go to the participant, but there will be an option for them to check off and have it signed over directly to the product or service provider. In some particular cases, that can be much more convenient and faster for both the participant and the contractor. Typically, that process, though, does involve some waivers and signatures to make sure that we're sending the money to the right person and not making any mistakes there.
Very important. Thanks, Marc. So a few questions about solar. So one question is, I believe I heard, but wanted to confirm that solar is still eligible for new construction projects.
Yeah, that's correct. So for energy efficiency measures, the business as usual case is quite different for new buildings versus existing retrofits. However, for on-site generation such as CHP and solar PV, it's always considered additional energy savings. So we do allow it on new buildings. The only challenge there is that we won't be able to adjust any timelines just because the facility is new. So it will still have to meet the same timeline conditions, which can, as we've seen, be a limiting factor for some buildings. If, for example, they haven't started being constructed yet, that might pose an additional challenge. But yes, they could apply and be eligible.
Great, thanks, Marc. And what about energy storage? Does the program include solar PV and energy storage?
We do not have any storage opportunities in this program, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. And there's a question about the funding percentages for different measures. So we just have a question clarifying what the max is. So is it clarifying that it's 15 to 30% or higher? Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. Happy to clarify there. So when I said 15 to 30, that's the design incentive level. So there will be a fixed set dollar amount or dollar per gigajoule for each measure type. And we were looking at the product cost and assessing it and setting them at levels kind of in that range. So any given measure will have that prescriptive incentive value, and it will also have a percent limit. And that really only applies in the case where the product costs are very low. And those limits will be 50% for most measures in the program, and then likely 25% for solar, CHP, and lighting measures. Although again, I'll caution that is one of those finer points I alluded to where we will be potentially changing things between now and launch, although that is where we are at today.
Great, thanks, Marc. Okay, so we have a really good question about our delivery as an organization. So we have a question about whether we have the staff necessary to review and approve applications in a timely manner. Did you want to speak a little bit about that, Marc?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we have a great and strong team over here at ERA. We do recognize that programs such as this, the ability to process high volume applications, like I said, we're hoping to reach thousands of businesses across Alberta and to provide really excellent customer service. That does have some specific needs. So for those who weren't aware, we did actually post a request for proposals a few weeks back for what we would call a program implementer. These are companies that are specialized in delivering the administration side of programs. They often manage the portal, the account management, and they'll be there answering the phones and reviewing applications without oversight from ERA. So we will be working with one of those as a partner in the delivery of this program.
Great, thank you, Marc. How about a limit to projects per business? Is there a limit of projects per business to be approved or just a dollar limit?
Just a dollar limit, so the $500,000 per company.
Okay, thanks, Marc. And this next question might be a good one for Steve to weigh in on. So we have a question about the demand for solar and why we would limit that particular funding in this program if we choose to limit it. Steve, did you want to weigh in a little bit on why, if the market's demanding solar, why would there be a program limit?
Well, I think the simple answer is we're trying to ensure a broad range of deployment of various technologies. The dollar amounts are finite. We expect the demand to exceed that. So we want to ensure that there's access to those whole range of technologies and develop those markets and those employment opportunities across a large number of technologies. So we're just mindful that we don't want to see any one technology sort of overpower what we're trying to build in terms of a broad-based economic opportunity in these cleaner technologies.
Thanks. Mark, did you want to weigh on that at all?
I guess the only thing I can add, that was a great answer, is that this applies to more than just solar. We would apply that to any measure in the program. It's just a function, as Steve said, that we have a collection of objectives we're hoping to achieve with this program, and one of those is diversity.
Great, thank you. Okay, so our next question is about approved contractors. So I think some of our listeners might be familiar with the ePro contractor network that the province previously had. So maybe you want to do a bit of a comparison and also talk about whether we'll be posting a list of approved contractors or not.
Yep, absolutely. So Energy Efficiency Alberta's ePro network was quite a bit different from what we're looking to do with this program, just because that was a more comprehensive contractor process with the goal of onboarding contractors to a whole range of programs. So they had to ask quite a few questions and make it a much more complicated application process. In the case of Energy Savings for Business, we're trying to keep it easy and streamlined. So those who participate in ePro will probably find that our onboarding is quite a bit faster and less complicated. And as I said, we want to keep it easy for contractors. We're trying to get more work out there as quick as we can in Alberta as part of economic recovery. So that's probably the biggest difference there will be the ease. We will likely not be posting list of eligible contractors. I guess that remains to be determined, but it's not something typically that we would do, so no.
Great, thanks, Mark. What about a limit to the number of applications per contractor? Is there a limit?
Nope, there's no limit, only by participating company.
Great,
thank you. Okay, so we have
Steve, I just wanted to jump in on an observation and some feedback to the folks listening. Is that we've come up with this basket of technologies we're prepared to fund at this point, but I want to be clear that we're going to monitor the evolution of this program and see how it evolves. If there are gaps, I heard the question around storage. If there's a gap there, small businesses and medium-sized businesses are demanding the opportunity in this space. There's a mature installation and capacity out there, products that can meet our criteria. We're prepared to adapt the program to fill those demands. So I just want to make that clear. You got to start somewhere. You've got to assess the marketplace. We've got to monitor sort of the take-up rate, but we will adapt the program as we learn and make sure that it's maximizing its outcomes in terms of driving down costs for our small business and medium-sized business owners, reducing GHGs, creating jobs, and stimulating the economy. So I just wanted to make sure people heard that I'm sure they appreciate you got to start somewhere. But we're a learning organization. We've all learned to adapt and pivot because of COVID and the economic crisis, and this program will also fulfill that requirement. The question around solar, I just want to again reinforce that solar is focused on the micro generation and then those programs that are compliant with that regulation. And it's clear that it's about offsetting local power only, and it cannot exceed annual consumption of the facility where it's installed. So this isn't about affecting the broader electricity utility market in any place. And that's true with all our technologies. Again, this is about applications in businesses now and meeting the needs of those businesses. So I just want to frame that for people as sort of a parting thought as we go, again, refine the eligibility criteria around this program, launch it, and then adapt as the market requires.
Great addition. Thanks, Steve. Okay, so this is a kind of back to the question about how we decided to allocate funding to different measures. What happens if other technologies have no or very little uptake and solar or lighting, for example, has the largest?
Yep, that's a great question. So, I mean, experience would suggest in any program, there's always going to be some measures that don't get a lot of uptake. As I said, we really tried to pick a broad range to make it as open and accessible to as many types as possible. So there might be some pretty niche things in there that only a few people participate and benefit from, and that's great. That's why it's there. There's some measures that we are expecting to see quite a bit of uptake, and if we're not, as Steve said, that's really where we're trying to monitor and be adaptable if we have to. And so we would look at various ways of getting more interest in those particular measures. So really, we're going to be fairly hands-on throughout the program monitoring, and often the biggest challenge, I know there's hopefully hundreds of people listening today, but the biggest challenge is making sure that everybody out there is aware of the program. So if we're not seeing uptake, usually our first response is to try to make sure that we're reaching the right people with the right information and make them aware of the opportunities out there. And then if there's an actual program barrier preventing participation, that's part of what we have this team here dedicated to keep an eye on and to sort things out as needed.
Yeah, and I'd respond to the folks that are interested in sort of this large demand around solar. We're trying to design this program as an incentive to allow businesses that extra nitro in the gas, to allow them to proceed with these projects that will create jobs and reduce costs. If there's this huge pent-up demand for solar installation, one has to argue, is there a need for an incentive? Are people just waiting on the sidelines, and you don't need public money to sort of incent that to happen? So those are some of the considerations that we'll be looking at. So rather than there's simply a demand there, what we're also looking at is what is the role of our funding to accelerate the broader deployment of that technology to create the jobs around those technologies. If there's this huge demand, maybe the market has matured to the point where our programs aren't necessary to actually accelerate and develop those to whatever opportunities exist.
Great, thank you to you both. So we have a question about how we are measuring the success of the program. So how will we measure the success of the program at the end of the day?
A variety of reasons. So obviously jobs is one of the main things we're looking for, and we'll be doing surveys to collect information from contractors and folks to get direct evidence of jobs, both job maintenance and job creation. Greenhouse gas emissions reductions is another one of our key success criteria. So achieving cost-effective greenhouse gas emissions reductions. Then energy savings that is passed on to the participants themselves. So for each measure, we quantify how much money this is saving each participant on their energy bill over the life of the program, and over the life of the measure. So that will be one of our key indicators as well. And then finally, we're looking at sort of the overall economic impact, and that we do have to measure that fairly secondhand. There's not a lot of easy thermometers to just go and measure our GDP impact, but we will be looking at the sort of overall leverage cost of all the eligible expenses and the labor that went into the program, and quantifying sort of the overall economic impact we had. So as I mentioned, those are really the 4 core parameters we built the program for. And then we have a bunch of other objectives behind the scenes where we're really trying to look at like supporting technologies that needed to be supported, getting a diversity of measures, both by industry type. So obviously we want to create jobs in Alberta, but not just all in one sector. We really want to see a variety of trades and contractors and engineers benefiting from this program. We want to see urban as well as rural folks being able to take advantage. We want to see small businesses and larger businesses. And even within there, there's a whole range of different sectors that participating projects work in, whether that's oil and gas or retail or warehouses. So diversity across all of those, again, is another one of our indicators.
Great, thank you, Marc. Okay, so I think we've got time for about 2 more questions. The next question is, who is the owner of the environmental attributes?
That is a great question. So because we are funded under the tier regulation, the funding is directly expected to achieve greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And the only way we can do that is by owning and retiring the credits. So when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions reductions, participants in this program will have to sign off their credits over to ERA so that we can then officially retire them. So yeah, it'll be ERA if they're in the program. There are other options out there, obviously, for larger facilities that are considering aggregating and going onto the offset market. That would not be an option if they proceed in the program, but we're always willing to work with participants to see which is the best opportunity for them, whether the offset system makes more sense or our program. If there's ways we can help, we're always happy to have those conversations.
Great. And then I just wanted to close off by noting we have a lot of questions in the inbox about eligibility. So eligibility of certain businesses, of certain measures. It could take a whole another 2 hours to go through all of those questions. So maybe we can just sum up by the question period by talking a little bit more about when more detailed eligibility criteria will be available.
Yep. So again, I'll just even start by saying thank you for your patience. I think what you saw today and heard today should hopefully give you a pretty good indication of what to expect. We're not really planning on having like a 90-degree turn from any of this between now and launch, but we understand that eligibility is one of those things where we want to get it right. And so that will unfortunately not be published probably until very close to launch, either at launch or slightly before.
Right, great, thanks, Marc.
I just want to reassure everybody, we've done this webinar to set the stage for what's coming, and we're not talking a number of months. We're standing up our capacity through December, and we're optimistic that we'll be having all this detailed information in the audience's hands by mid-January. We know there's a demand out there. We know that economic stimulus is critical at this time, so we're fast tracking as much as we can. This webinar is to set the stage, give you some information to get you ready. There's been some past experience you can know that we're building on, but again, I just don't want the message, you gotta wait months and months to find out what's happening. We're talking weeks and program and decisions made quickly and published within the next 6 to 8 weeks.
Great, thank you, Steve and Marc. That's a great way to close off the Q&A period. So Marc, I'll pass it back to you to close this webinar out.
Perfect. So again, as I mentioned probably multiple times, please do continue to go and visit our website. We'll be posting all of the updated information there. You can find our website by going to eralberta.ca and then navigating through the funding tab and scrolling down, you'll see all of ERA's funding and will be the pretty green box labeled ESB. So you can find our page there. Again, if, as Allison said, if you have unanswered questions, we have a dedicated email, that's energysavings@eralberta.ca. We're happy to receive any further questions there and we'll do our best to respond as quickly as we can. And finally, the last thing I'll do is again encourage you to sign up for the expression of interest. That puts you on a mailing list so that you don't even have to check our website. You'll get all of the updates as quickly as possible and you'll be the first to hear about everything. Finally, as I mentioned, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted. You'll be able to access that on ERA's YouTube page. So with that, I want to thank you for your time and we really do look forward to working with you as this program proceeds.